Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Dynamo webinar. We're here with 4 government technology leaders to hear directly from them on lessons learned from working through the COVID pandemic. Thank you firstly to Dynamo for hosting. For those of you who don't know Dynamo, we're a non-profit member network in the Northeast. We support our members with the overall mission of growing the region's tech economy through collaboration, innovation, and skills. I'm Cate Kalson. I lead Oliver Wyman's Newcastle office, which is our UK data and analytics hub. And I'm also a board member of Dynamo, focused on regional talent development. One of Dynamo's key focus areas or clusters is government technology. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panel today. Firstly, we've got Jacqui Leggetter, who is Head of Integration at DWP. She started working in DWP 20 years ago and has undertaken various digital roles and worked on many transformations throughout her career. Her current focus is on transforming integration. Antony Collard joins us as Director of Strategy, Design, Architecture and Innovation at HMRC. He has worked in government for over 25 years across a range of professions, including technology, compliance, operational delivery and programme management. He built and led the HMRC digital delivery capability in its first 4 years and was recently involved in the many COVID services HMRC launched, including Eat Out to help out during the pandemic. Daniel Korski is Chief Executive and co-founder of Public. He has 20 years of experience in senior positions in government across the UK, EU and US, including 3 years as Deputy Head of Policy at 10 Downing Street. The company Public combines knowledge from government, technology and finance to help startups and others deliver better public services. And last but not least, we're joined by Tom Lawson, who is Chief Executive at Opencast Software since 2020. He brings to the discussion direct experience of working with government departments to provide new digital services for people and businesses that needed help during the pandemic. Opencast earlier this year published a research paper, Lessons from the Storm, offering 5 key insights for govtech from the COVID crisis. So welcome to all of our panellists. So I think to kick us off would be great to hear from you, Tom, on what you think the key lessons are that we can learn from the pandemic in terms of how to better deliver government technology projects.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, I think one of the big things that we found really during the whole response to the pandemic was this sort of moment of crisis created this real need for speed across, which really cut through everything else, and it brought together suppliers, it brought together government, it brought together the policymakers, and really got everyone aligned around one outcome, and kind of cut all of the noise and blockages that you might experience in any context, not just government, and moved all of those out of the way and forced everyone to really focus on getting things done. And I think then the subsequent pace that was then by which things were then delivered, you know, certainly really shocked me, and I'm sure others as well, in terms of just how quickly key services were stood up, you know, robust, in place, ready to help citizens within a matter of weeks. And some of these things used to take, you know, months or even years. And I think, you know, that there's huge credit to what's gone on in government around that, you know, that had prepared us for this point in many ways. But then that, yeah, I do think there was something very interesting about this moment of crisis, just really creating the mandate for us to all operate at real pace.
Antony, would you kind of echo Tom's words there? What are your experiences over the past year?
I would agree with everything Tom said, to be honest. I think it was we kind of culturally moved forward in about 6 weeks, something that would normally take us 2 or 3 years to do. Now, we've been doing digital and HMRC for a long time, but those services take a while to set up. You know, what did we change? We changed our way of working. We embedded that kind of way across our entire technology stack. We actually became the consultants to the business, which was a really big change for us. You know, IT in the past in government has often been seen as the supplier to the rest of the business, and now all of a sudden we're the partners. You know, and being involved in conversations with ministers and special advisors about the right way to deliver a policy has been really useful. In fact, what we're now seeing we're doing within HMRC is learning the lessons from the pandemic and making that part of how we do transformation in the future. So actually, how do we embed what we managed to do in a crisis? And Tom's point about the crisis is really, you know, it's amazing how the barriers come down when you're in a crisis. how can we now embed that as business as usual? For me, one of the greatest experiences really was actually having one of my content designers in a room with one of our senior legal people and a senior policy person, all designing content collaboratively that would then go onto a digital service to make it easy for a customer to understand, but that would deliver the policy intent. I mean, we moved 5 years in 6 weeks. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear that kind of multidisciplinary approach that I think, can be a challenge to get running in a relatively small, private sector organisation, let alone these huge government departments. Jacqui, do you want to come in on that similar point? Did you have those same experiences? Have you got any specific examples of what's really enabled that change in ways of working within your teams?
Yeah, I think it really resonates what Tom and Antony have just said, and certainly on some of the input to the policy decisions. If we think about right at the start of the pandemic, when the Prime Minister made that announcement on TV that we were all going into lockdown, we knew right at that moment that there was going to be a significant number of people financially impacted by that. And if we thought about discussions that went on with ministers right in the early days around how we can best support those people in terms of providing financial support, traditionally it would have just been put them all on benefit. But through conversations, meaningful conversations with HMRC and DWP and Number 10 coming up with a much better answer, which was the furlough scheme. And that's the difference that it made, having people who understand the service design and the service journeys and looking at what is the problem that you're trying to solve, rather than jumping to traditionally what you know. I think for us in DWP, we really shortened the governance route. So where you might have to go through 3 or 4 hoops, we combined all of that into one really shortened governance route. And we had a lot of autonomy from Number 10 and from Treasury in order to respond to the pandemic quickly as well. And the big thing for us in DWP that we looked at was reuse. So how could we drive speed working with our operational colleagues? We had lost, all of our services traditionally were based on at least some face-to-face interaction or telephony interaction. We weren't although you could make your initial claim online, the subsequent steps involved human contact. And all of a sudden, all of our operations staff were sent home. All of our digital teams were sent home. We were used to rallying around multidisciplined agile teams in a single location. And all of a sudden, we were in locations up and down the UK. And as Antony says, it was a complete overnight change in a way in our way of working, and a logistical marathon to get kit out to people to actually enable them to work at home. But it proved to us that we can do it, and it has helped to shape our thinking and accelerating some of our transformation as well.
That's really interesting. I think, Daniel, maybe you can pick up on that point around policy advisors getting closer to understanding, how things can be implemented and how services can be delivered, because that certainly sounds like something that is very, very sensible to do, but I suspect, hasn't historically been the norm. Is it something you think is recognised on the policy making side, and how much do you think that will continue versus, what education is needed for those policymakers to really understand the implications of, what they're thinking about?
So, I mean, the first thing to say is, just like the military print medals after each kind of military campaign, I kind of feel that government digital people sort of need to have a kind of COVID campaign medal, because I think the work that, Tom, Jacqui and Antony has described, which took place in a million different offices, I exaggerate a bit, but across government, central, local, has really been just extraordinary, and without doubt also with some considerable kind of personal sacrifice. So I sort of feel like there should be a kind of COVID digital campaign medal that we can pin on people. And I really like the fact that we've touched on so many of the different issues. Users, what do they need? How do we get to them? Which I know has been the mantra of government for a long time, but when we design things, it isn't actually always with a view of the user in mind. And Antony's point about how technology became part of the policy conversation, I think is something those of us who worked both in policy and technology have been hankering for a while. Normally in government, and it speaks a bit, Cate, to your point, normally in government, the process is, and I obviously am caricaturing it, but the process is, let's get this thing done. This is what we want to do. By the way, down in IT, can you just sort of get this thing done? As opposed to, you know, the service design, the policy design, and technology design question kind of revolving together. So I think that's enormously positive. On the other hand, and I think, Cate, in a way, you speak to that a little bit in your question, how much of this is going to get embedded? And just to be a bit sort of provocative, it's all fine and well to say that we're going to embed these processes, and everybody's busy sort of repeating that mantra. But first of all, we've got an SR coming up, and the spending review is going to be, you know, on every measure, a difficult one. And the question is going to be the extent to which the Treasury is going to allow some of these slightly different practices to be embedded and to use financial resources to embed them. So I think the jury's out, and I think there's a case to be made, but we shouldn't assume that it is sort of going to, that the Green Book and a bunch of other processes are automatically going to be kind of updated. And I think the second point to come to is we both exposed how absolutely brilliant, you know, officials and particularly the, you know, digital cadre are, but also how limited a lot of our understanding of digital programs and technology is amongst other cadres in government, whether they be ministers, special advisors, or policy officials. And if you conclude that in any other organization, you would start a large change program to upskill everybody digitally. I don't mean to teach everybody, you know, Python, but just for them to understand what it is to oversee digital programs, what's possible, what's not possible. So I think it's fair to say that that has not happened. Yeah, nobody has stood up to say, okay, this has been great, but we've also exposed these skill gaps. Here's like the plan going forward. And so I think that we've seen it in a few places, but we have definitely not seen the sort of overall, you know, gap filling, skills upgrading effort that I think needs to now come if we want to embed some of these practices, but also, frankly, learn and realize from the things that didn't go so well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thread. I think what I'd probably quite like to hear from Antony and Jacqui on is of those different skills. We all know that digital kind of skills and professionals have got a real range. So from those really hard technical skills, like you mentioned Python, Daniel, but you know, software development, software delivery, back-end engineers, all of that stuff feels to me a little bit less relevant to like a policy toolkit. But there are obviously things more around user-centered design, those kind of skills that maybe would be really relevant for people to understand in particularly those senior leadership levels in government. You know, did you see that in your interactions with those policymakers during the pandemic? And have you got any thoughts around what types of skills or training or experiences would be really beneficial to embed in those parts of government? Antony, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've got a fairly strong community, particularly in the Northeast, of user-centered designers in HMRC. It's one of the things we prioritise when we build digital, and I think putting them in front of policy people was a really interesting experience because they come at it from a different angle from what the policy people are thinking. You know, for me, sometimes policy is about how clever the policy can be, rather than what is actually going to work for the normal citizen. And most of the normal citizens, with the greatest respect, haven't gone and got degrees in politics and policy making. They're just people trying to make a living and do those kind of things, you know. And so, you know, we brought those very much to them. And service design, I think, is a new thing in government, and I think that's really useful because also what you see in government is we you know, people think about things in a very linear fashion. Here is a digital service, but that digital service actually has to join up to the other channels that wrap around it, whether that's a web chat, whether that's telephony, you know, so that actually becomes a seamless policy. So having these people in the room has been really, really important. And, you know, we're carrying on upskilling those people and building those communities. Now, our 140 user researchers have been, you know, really crucial, not just for this, but for EU exit as well, which has been a big thing about the same time. And I think, you know, the little bit of schadenfreude I had over EU exit was, you know, I've been banging on about you've got to test the services with the users before you launch them, otherwise they won't understand them. And the slight issues we'd had with that were that users didn't understand the services, which is what we were saying. So we're starting to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't understand what your user needs are, then you can't build good services. So, you know, we need to build those skills out. I mean, I'm responsible for user-centered design, and so all that policy sits in my space. And what we're trying to do now is, and so, you know, my title is really Chief Technology and Design Officer, and there's a reason the design is alongside Chief Technology, because it's not just about great architecture, as you said, Kate. It's actually about how do you make that architecture work for the people who are using it internally and externally. And then how do we face off? And it is my team that will be facing off to our policy people in the future to say, let's think about policy before you've even thought about it. And Daniel made a really interesting point. We're heading to the SR. There is so much going on right now. Actually, we've got to start thinking about what we need to be doing in 5 years' time for the next pandemic or the next crisis or the next technical thing. And user-centered design is a big part of that. So I'm rambling a bit. I'll let Jacqui say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective in DWP, I couldn't agree more. The user-centric design is absolutely key for us, and also having the multi-channel available, so enabling us to deal with citizens either by telephone, online, or in person based on that need. So the user needs and the user journey, the service design is really key in this. I think for us, what came out as well is the absolute power of being able to share information across government, and for policy people in particular, trying to get them to see beyond the policy silo. So I think Antony described that as linear thinking. We have all rallied around in DWP. All of our product lines are actually siloed in the policy product lines, when actually it's recognised that citizen needs are a bit more complex than that. It's rare that they will interact with a single policy product. It's not unusual to have someone who has lost the job who may also be caring for a disabled parent or something like that, and they will interact with multiple lines. And one of the things that that we found is by looking at the user need as a holistic need and not as a policy need, it's really helping to shape the policy thinking now, and trying to get policy that have really entrenched in, I do pensions policy, I do policy for disability and health, I do policy for employment, for them to start thinking about developing policies that are around perhaps a holistic citizen need, or at least our services being able to hide those silos from citizens and us service those policy products in a holistic way. And I think the sharing data across government, if we think about the need for data in the pandemic, there's never been a greater demonstration of the power of information, whether it's around how many people are on furlough for financial planning, for job market planning, through to even creating the NHS vulnerable citizen database, identifying all citizens over the age of 80 who has that information, and identifying where is your best source of data, and being able to share that, and really driving the use of data sharing in a secure and sensible way across government through open API event-driven architecture, and also where it's large-scale data through some secure large-scale data movements, but moving in line with GDPR, and sharing that data was really powerful in helping loads of colleagues across government deliver their services as well. And that's something that will carry forward, and we're seeing coming through in the next SR bid, the support for anything that is a cross-government initiative.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqui. Tom, I've seen you put a comment in here around, you know, this being the time for digital professionals to shine, really, in terms of influencing that kind of way of thinking. And that's really interesting. And I'd like to take that a step further to ask you, what do you see the role, I guess, of professional services providers like Opencast and others, you know, going forward to support with that? I suppose naturally, you know, myself also working in that role, we do work across departments, right? So we sort of see the siloing and see it from a little bit from outside in. You know, what are your thoughts on how to partner with, you know, colleagues like Antony and Jacqui to get the message across and to really raise that agenda within and across government?
You said it there. The key word is being partners. You know, that's what's been a great hallmark of the success of the response to the pandemic, has been people working as partners, not driving their own agendas, not trying to do things in their own way, or to kind of, you know, feather their own nests. At least I think in many of the the digital projects we've been involved in, it's you need the supplier community needs to be there to provide some different experiences, some advice, input, you know, honesty, integrity, and the support and supporting our civil service colleagues in driving that change. I think, you know, to pick out one of the other points that I just want to amplify a little bit, that what was great in the pandemic was all of the good practice, good principles that have been built up by the combination of, you know, the supplier community and the civil service weren't abandoned to address this. People didn't revert to doing things in a different way. They just did this stuff faster and used the tools at their disposal and the practices that had been put in place, and really proved that those were robust. You could scale them and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think we need to continue to be, you know, to support our colleagues in civil service in kind of driving that message out and using these proof points that we've shown through the pandemic as evidence of why this is the right way to be going with these things.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Daniel, I'd like to ask you really around kind of what's your sense around the real level of innovation that has been driven versus kind of doing what needs to be done, and where is that innovation coming from? I think, you know, with your role at Public, I suppose you see a lot of opportunity for bringing innovation into government technology from startups, from small organisations that are, you know, maybe freer and more able to drive innovation. You know, how well is that working, and has that been supercharged, or is that something really that kind of now maybe the storm is over, it's something to focus on going forward?
It's a great question, and the truth is, I'm afraid it's lumpy soup. You know, some ladles are tasty and nutritious and others are a bit watery. And what I mean by that is, you know, here we've got, you know, DWP and HMRC represented, but of course the response has been, you know, much bigger and much wider. And the truth is, we've seen in a number of different areas some terrible commercial practices, and I'm just talking about technology and digital, and I'm not talking about terrible in the sense of, you know, legally inappropriate, just poor value for money. You know, no bid contracts with incumbent providers that further entrench their position. You know, a great example, and you know, is the fact that the NHS decided for vaccine administration to go with an EMIS-owned Pinnacle system, which was being used in pharmacies for flu jabs, which was, you know, just a very poor choice architecturally, but also entrenched an incumbent provider at a moment when, up until the crisis, the argument had been, no, let's have a more plural marketplace, let's have new players come in. Well, those new players are now going around going, okay, well, we've just been locked out of, you know, further sort of things. So I think it's been lumpy soup. I would also say, so at the start of the crisis, we launched a collaboration between DCMS, CLG, and NHS called Tech Force 19, and it was basically, how can we quickly get innovative product-led companies in as part of solution sets. I think it was enormous enthusiasm, you know, in like 2.5 weeks, we had 1,700 applications at the height of the crisis. We sifted them in collaboration with officials to understand exactly what requirements might be, and I should say, done all pro bono. But what we found was that even after the innovation had come through, even after officials had said it fits perfectly with what we're trying to do, even after we had, you know, gotten around all the commercial hurdles, when I now look back a year later with the question, okay, so how much of what was piloted is now being taken forward and scaled? And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion. And so, you know, I mean, everybody's been through this sort of dialogue before, no doubt, on this call. You know, the joke is, in government, there are more pilots than BA. It's not quite true, and I'm not against piloting things, because I think that's the only way we sort of try to figure out what might work. But we need a better connection with what we're piloting and what can then scale. And if the case remains that we pilot lots and scale nothing, then maybe we need to rethink how we're doing things. And that, to me, I see too much entrenchment by incumbent providers, and the crisis has allowed openings for some, but also closure for others.
Yeah, I guess, Jacqui, Antony, have you got any perspectives on that from your side in terms of how easy or not you find it to engage with these kind of innovative providers, and success stories or barriers and things that you would seek to change in order to kind of unlock more innovation?
I think from a DWP perspective, the commercial landscape for us, we have spent the last, I think, probably 3 years really investing and moving away from the monolithic and reliance on suppliers. And certainly the way in which we work is through building in-house capability and then supplementing that. So we're building new commercial partnerships with organisations. So we're moving away where we can from that traditional buyer and provider arrangement, and we tend to use the commercial landscape to help supplement our capability, to help bring in a specific perhaps area of expertise or niche product, or off-the-shelf experts in a specific off-the-shelf product. We do try to be really open and use the various frameworks that are available to us through the Crown Commercial Service. So obviously we are constrained. We do rarely go to open market because we don't do those big multi-million pound, tens of millions of pounds worth of contracting. We do tend to do more smaller, more targeted contracts. And certainly in DWP, we have a really wide range of partners working with us in all of our digital areas. I can't think of a specific area that we don't have any partners working alongside, and it's not single companies. So we've come a long way. There is more to do. There's more to do, particularly with helping the smaller companies and SMEs, and we have to find a better way of doing that. But we're getting there and making a great inroad, I would say.
Antony, anything to add from your perspective on?
I mean, it's largely the same. We have to face facts. We've been an outsourced IT organisation for 20 years, from about 1994 to 2014, and the IT function that was HMRC was very small. And we've gone through one phase of breaking that down. Columbus, we've insourced some things ourselves. We're bringing in more suppliers. We didn't go the full way because actually that was a big change to move from sort of 1 or 2 suppliers to lots in one place and keep that estate on track. Our technology sourcing program is now in flight, and I think that will bring more change and will disrupt some of the incumbents that we have, and rightly so. And we are being open about bringing those people in. I mean, I don't necessarily see replacing incumbents with that as being fully the extent to which we need to be innovative, though. I mean, for me, innovation is actually about how we bring technology to bear for what future policy looks like, right? I think for me, and as a technologist point of view, partnerships with people who Daniel kind of engages with is really important to show policymakers and thinkers how the world can be different. So some really good, if you look at some of the things we've the challenges that the pandemic threw up. One was about data, right? I mean, everyone believes that government has a handle on everything that everyone's doing in the UK. We simply don't. We don't join up. We don't have common data policies. We don't even have it in HMRC. So some of the things we couldn't do within the pandemic was because of the state of our data and the data model. And there'll be companies out there who can bring innovation into that model to help us fix those kind of problems. Then there's companies out there who can then showcase with us as partners, as Tom said, what the future world for us, and I'll be very shallow and narrow-minded, what the future of tax and customs could look like. When you look at things that China are doing and Singapore are doing, and everyone raises Estonia, I kind of discount that a little bit because it's very easy having 2 million people, very compliant population, compared to 66 million not very compliant Brits. But the bottom line is there are things in there that you can bring to the party and say, look what they're doing in terms of, say, customs declarations, and they're using blockchain. And actually, the government doesn't need to do anything here. It just just needs to piggyback on the back of something that a third sector company has built that others are using, and we're just getting data from them. So I think, that's really the direction that we're pushing in, and using those companies to stand alongside us to show the way about how future policy could be different. And that's the challenge. I think Daniel's point about pilots. We do have lots of pilots. And I think many of them don't scale, because actually the biggest change for government is that cultural change. There's a lot of safety in doing what works, even if it works the equivalent of a bike with just one wheel. Actually, we've got to show that actually it's possible to move to a car and then a rocket car, and this is how you can do it, by using innovative companies like Public and that, to show us, look, if you do it this way, this has already been done over here, and now you can start to think about what advantages it brings to you. So I think those are the two bits I'll be talking about.
Yeah, they're really helpful. Yeah, Daniel, what do you think? If you had to rate the UK out of 10 on ability to learn from other nations, outside, how good are we? And is that culturally, how far off are we from being comfortable with the sort of not invented here mindset?
I think we're amazing. I genuinely do. I think that it's very hard to find a country that is as large and as agile. So you can find countries that are much more agile, but they tend to be, to Antony's point, much smaller. And you can find countries that are able to engage much bigger transformation programs more successfully. But I think we are, if I think of our peer group, of the other large industrialized nations, Germany, France spring to mind, Canada maybe a bit less. I think we're definitely much more flexible and agile. I think I feel it's much easier. I mean, we operate in Germany now, but we have also operated in Denmark and France, and I have found that it's so much easier to engage the British public sector with new thoughts and new ideas. I think there's a greater willingness to just sort of, let's see what's out there. Let's see how we can think differently about it. I think there's a really interesting dynamic. I was thinking about it when Antony was talking, because on the one hand, people are like Estonia, yes, okay, but please don't talk to me about Estonia because it's all too complex. And it's fair enough. They started 20 years ago on a clean slate, and in fact, they're only discovering what legacy is today because the stuff they put in 20 years ago, guess what? It's not really working for them. But I do think that there are certain enabling kind of almost infrastructural elements that we have been reluctant to put in place that other countries have more successfully. And I mean, digital ID is just one example, but there are a bunch of others. Denmark, I think we could do very well to study Denmark much more than I think Estonia. Larger country, had to deal with legacy, but at this entrenched kind of supplier market, but has in a number of different ways created some enabling systems that I think we could learn a lot from. Canada, I think, and some of the provinces have done really well, and the Canadian digital service. And finally, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in the US over the coming years of the Biden administration. I mean, they are shoveling money to government digital transformation at an extraordinary rate. I mean, something that we cannot even imagine. And that can lead to lots of great things and can also lead to a lot of waste. So, but it'll be fascinating to see, because they're hiring great people, they're bringing them their wallets, and it'll be fascinating to see. So I think we're enormously well placed. If I could just add one element, is to say, to sort of challenge the thinking a bit. Who is we? Is we England? Is we Scotland? Is we Northern Ireland? Is we Wales? Is we the devolved the devolved combined mayoral authorities? Who's we? Because I think we do not have a unified, union-wide digital vision, which I think is lacking. We have a level up agenda, but not a digital complement to the level up agenda. And we have, and we'll always have, an incredibly complex interplay of levels of authority, but we have not sought to find out what is the digital setup that can service this incredibly complex you have large councils like Birmingham City Council, the largest council in Europe. You have the devolved authority in the West Midlands, but then you also have, tiered and unified councils and the rest of it. Okay, that's fine. But how does a government create a digital setup that allows these constitutional, legal, and political structures to exist as they want to and need to, but at the same time allow the citizen to have a seamless experience? I think we have not thought that through. And so the answer is, who's the we? Yes. British central state? Yes. English central state? Yes. Scottish? Yes. Wales? Not so sure. Northern Ireland? Not so sure. London, some boroughs, some not others. Devolved authorities, some devolved, not others. So
yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. Maybe in my mind it comes back to that point around like who is close to the user and who is really thinking about users in a more holistic way. And therefore also that data sharing point, maybe we could dig into a bit more, because you mentioned the term digital ID, that without getting into a complete rabbit hole, I would be interested in Tom, kind of Antony, Jacqui, your perspectives on digital ID and like data sharing technology. And as you say, there's maybe an outside citizen perspective, which is governments must know like what I've been doing with this department over here when I then talk to this one. But we all know that's not the reality. What does the future hold there? And is there anybody really taking that lead? Is there clarity on where that leadership should come from to start to try and tackle the huge challenge that is data sharing across government?
So I think I'm happy to talk to that first, because we've been working quite a lot in this space with some of our colleagues in the Cabinet Office. And I think Antony made a really good point about we don't all hold data in the same format. We don't even mean the same thing with the data labels that we hold. And there's something for us about working through how can we share data that's held in a structured way in the silo, but is unstructured if it's exposed to other government departments. And that's what's really been driving us over the last couple of years on our API event-driven approach, and creating really robust data standards and having an API contract first. So if you want to share a piece of data across government, you're not starting from the technology, you're actually starting from a human readable format contract that defines this is the information that I need. So regardless as to what that data is labelled in any other government department, if you say in your contract, I want to know the home address of where the person lives, or I want to know what the correspondence address is that the person uses, or whatever that might be, then the person who owns that data is able to surface that data with a label that you understand, so it makes the data more shareable. There's also some work going on in Cabinet Office to try and standardise some of the data, because while that may help us with some of our sharing of data that's held in our legacy systems, as we build new systems, wouldn't it make wonderful sense if we build our new transformed systems using the same data descriptions, data definitions? So I think our data colleagues, and there is a cross-government data working group working on this now. It's still at early days, but we should start to see common government data standards that will help us as we build the transformed services, building more and more using common data. And I think our API and event-driven architecture is the route that we're seeing. Other governments, so the Scottish Government, our UK government departments, and in Wales, if we adopt those types of architectures that give us a common way of building technology and a common, really innovative way of sharing data and information, that's where we will get to, and that will unlock some of that data sharing. And we found some of that really powerful during the early days of the pandemic, where we had APIs already in play, and we were able to use some of those APIs or add a new feature to an existing API, to enable us to, for example, our universal credit claims, 2.5 million universal credit claims in the first month, of the pandemic, we would normally do a face-to-face contact with those people to prove their identity. We were able to use our data and data from other government departments to build up an API that enabled us to actually validate the identity of those citizens digitally. And that was really powerful because that got those 2.5 million claims, and it's there and it's lived, and it's now provided that same authentication for more than 5 million people. So I think that's the way, if we can adopt those modern and innovative ways, that will help us join up more across government.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Tom, I've seen that you have added some comments in the chat. Do you want to come in on that similar point?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my sort of contribution to this bit would really be around I think departments, certainly the ones that we've dealt with over the last few years, you've seen a massive push in those departments to move away from silos within departments and actually really start thinking about the citizen journey, the user journey within a department, which has been brilliant, and that's driving change at all sorts of levels in the way that services are envisioned and delivered. I think to some of the broader points we've touched on here, and some of Daniel's points, it's going to be starting to then join some of that up at the more macro levels, and there's all different levels of kind of government that operate in this country and in others. So, but I think, yeah, as building that up and starting to really join those things up is definitely an ambition that we've got to take forward, and not drive back into creating very small isolated things that only consider one aspect of a journey. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Can I just come in on the API point, which Jacqui, I think you put brilliantly, and I've written up in the chat, because I think there's another dimension to this, which is I think we need to, mandate all APIs in all contracts that have a data component, and where obviously there's I say there's a way it's in the public interest, and I think we need to go further. I think we need to impose the provider cost, not on government, and the right to use the API for free for the life of the contract, and to provide the API to third parties. Because what often happens is, if I'm a bit provocative, Jacqui, people like you say, it's all wonderful, and we're going to do all this, and then you actually turn around, and then you look at the estate as it exists, and suddenly you realize you have a bunch of incumbent suppliers that are controlling the API access. You realize that's not right. Ministers realize that's not right. We then go to them with our lifted finger and go, you must allow third-party access. And they're like, yes, we're working very hard on it, which of course is not true. And upload times are terrible. And so what we often end up with is a great policy, but the reality of a partly outsourced IT estate with some walled gardens around, around the system, that where with limited, API access, and certainly limited to third parties, even though we want a system that in future allows lots of third parties to play. So my point is just that the corollary of kind of your agenda, Jacqui, is to then take our commercial friends by the hand in commercial functions and say, right, stock and flow, on which contracts have we imposed this requirement? Where haven't we? Let's work our way through them, because if we don't, we will discover that this, will work in certain areas as it has for you, but in lots of others it won't.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good point, Daniel. And I think with our strategy to deliver that API first, we're not putting any of our services in third-party provider hands, so they're all internal DWP services. They are made available across DWP initially, but we have actually populated an API catalog. So the API, it's the discovery of the data through the APIs that's the unlocker, isn't it? And we have published a number of our APIs in a cross-government catalog. They've not yet been made available to third parties, and you're right, there's more innovation, that we need to do that to get the external facing API catalogue. If we look at some of the work, maybe Antony can talk about some of the work that's been done in HMRC. They've done a huge amount of really fantastic work to open out their developer portal and make their APIs available for people to develop against. For us in DWP, we focused a little bit more on our internal initially in that holistic journey, and then sharing cross-government, and we're looking now at how can we open those up. We've opened up APIs, for example, to the NHS to do a free prescription validation check. So we do free school meal checks wherever somebody's relying on benefit entitlement as a passport benefit. We do open up APIs, and we're moving those to the real-time API check, moving away from the traditional bulk file transfer method. So it's real-time targeted individual check, and that's our strategy going forward for any cross-government checks. So I think we've done a bit of work in there, but you're right, we've got a way to go. We've certainly got a way to go for that, making them available to external third parties. But I know HMRC has done an awful lot of that. So I don't know if Antony wants to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I can do if you want, Kate, very quickly. I mean, we have done that. Our Making Tax Digital policy, which we started in 2015-16, did open up our APIs for VAT and the future for others to come in. I think we've got about 999 software suppliers who are building software for companies to use. You know, and I think more of that, really. I mean, I still think that's the foothills of what we could do. I mean, I think the important bit about data and APIs is then all about trust and law, and can we share and who can we share with. I think that's the important element that we've got to crack at the same time. You know, we tax through trust in this economy. And so if taxpayers can't trust that their data is going to be used by the right people in the right way, then suddenly that trust is undermined, and we've got to, you know, deal with that. But I think it's perfectly, if you look at some of the technologies like blockchain and other things like that, then I think in the future we will be having to trust, because it's in the interest of the citizen to do that. And I think we've got to take them on that journey to say, actually, if you use this technology in this way and you do your service this way, then your life becomes a lot easier, because you know what, government doesn't want to, we don't want to deal with you ideally. We want to do what we need to do for government. You need to get on with your life. And I think all of these are challenges that we need to crack. And the final bit, I'd say, you know, and Tom made the point, so did Daniel earlier, they're all cyclical. Legacy is a big issue for us. You know, one of the someone asked in the chat, what was the biggest lesson learned from the pandemic? That our data and the way in which we capture it now, and this isn't about data standards, it's actually about the kind of data we think we need, doesn't necessarily match to what the public now thinks. You think about tax is about the individual, and yet some of our policies about tax as the family or the household or the business. And if we're not capturing that data in a granular enough fashion, we can't actually then shape policy to enable those things to actually be played out in future policies. So we've got to change that model a little bit. And then some of that then comes back down to legacy. Some of that is about embedded in legacy systems that need to change. And that then goes back to the point Daniel made about funding and SR spending bids. You know, we put in a very, I would call it highly optimistic SR bid to tackle our legacy this year. And needless to say, sort of wrong time. You know, just as we get focused on legacy as government, which became a big thing in 2020 at the start of it, then the pandemic comes along and takes sort of money that may have been off the table to do that away. And you know, we know we've got a lot of legacy issues, including data to crack. And I think if we don't get that funding to do it, we have to be a bit innovative about how we do that. And I think that's just the final thing I'd say is, you know, having platforms like the multi-channel digital tax platform, which we surface all our APIs through and which we built all of our COVID services on, does give us the opportunity to architect things and use data science tools and techniques to be able to bend our way around this. I'm not a fan of tactical, but I think over the next couple of years with funding being tight, we may have to be tactical to enable all the vision that we've been talking about here.
Yeah, and that's a really good point around like being pragmatic. If the funding is not there, like what can be done, and like you say, getting the right balance between tactical versus perfection. Yeah, very interesting.
And this ties, sorry, just quickly to say, and this ties into commercial arrangements, because the more that you are able to, you know, integrate services, the more you're able to, if you want to break, you know, delivery into different lots, have providers who are particularly good at one thing and not another, rather than having to compromise with a provider who is covering a range of things and so on. So there's a sort of commercial advantage to the right sort of data infrastructure and integration.
Do you think, I guess, come back a bit to almost a skills point, do you think within commercial teams, the understanding of things like API technology and is good enough to really enable that, I guess, commercial sophistication to develop? Or is that one of the upskilling kind of potential focus themes, do you think?
Is that to me?
Yeah, to you.
How to express myself in a way that doesn't make every commercial officer in government hate me. I would start slightly, if you don't mind, I would zoom out a bit. And I would say that we have a problem in how we train, incentivize, in culture, and promote commercial officers in government. It is not seen as a prestigious career outside of a very narrow professional specialist, cadre. There is definitely I would say, a culture of condescension between policy and commercial. A little bit also between technology and commercial, but our technologists here can speak to that better than I can. And I think the outcome of which has been, and I also think there's something dysfunctional about the role of CCS in government, but we can get onto that separately. The outcome of all this is that I don't think we've got a kind of purring commercial service on a range of different fronts, of which technology, I think, is one of them. I think things have gotten better in certain areas because people have come from the outside with experience of overseeing and buying larger kind of commercial projects. But I also see lots of areas where that's not happened. And I see areas even where really poor commercial decisions over IT, so poor that the NAO has called decisions criminally negligent, the contract is awarded to the same company, where the NAO has said, do not do this. And so that speaks to a sort of function that is still, immature in a number of ways, including, I think, on technology and digital. But my colleagues will maybe have other perspectives.
Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say a really interesting thing that I know we participated in with DWP this year was their commercial team came out to really consult on with the supplier community about the future and how to best engage, particularly the kind of SME community, that was a really, really positive step for me. There were, it gave us a chance to put across some, combination of, some reasonably provocative opinions actually about how we see things and how we think things need to change. And there was actually a really good process there where it felt like we were being listened to. They were very interested to hear about that stuff. And to some of Daniel's points, I think it's getting that engagement and seeing commercial acting as a partner again in that sense to both the business that they're serving, but also the suppliers that they need to be able to then make use of. I think it's really, really very important. So that was a really positive step for me because I've not seen that type of, I think the level of honesty and openness in the engagement that was really encouraged, and it did feel a much more positive partnerial step on that front.
That definitely sounds like heading in the right direction. So I'm conscious of time. We've only got 5 minutes left. So I think what I'd like all of you to do really is just come in on finally kind of what specific thing or theme makes you feel most optimistic, but equally kind of what is it that's keeping you up at night, or what's the main area where you feel like there isn't a clear path forward and you want to amplify that to the audience on the webinar today. So, Antony, let's start with you.
Most optimistic that the department as a whole has recognised how we've managed to deliver all the things we managed to deliver in that short space of time, and the feedback we've had from citizens and businesses alike, both for the furlough scheme, self-employment, income support, Eat Out to Help Out. Has recognised that it wants to do things differently and is starting to structure itself in a way that will enable that to happen. I think that's a really optimistic thing. If we just went back to normal after the pandemic and said, right, okay, here we go, we're back in the long consultations and all that kind of stuff, I'd be worried. So I'm optimistic about that. I still think the challenges will come back down to funding and the ability to keep all the things on the road. We've got already a fairly extensive policy agenda. We are still in the middle of dealing with the consequences of EU exit. The pandemic isn't over. We're still building new schemes, and yet we've got a massive legacy IT estate that we need to modernise at the same time. And I think there are opportunities. So there's another degree of optimism. I think if we use our TSP program in the right way, we should be able to exploit the marketplace to help us come and solve some of those problems that we have got. We don't have to solve them all ourselves. And just the final point, I guess, then is, and it's what you just last talking about, I think, it's not just about commercial learning how we do this together. We've had 20 years of outsourced IT. And so, that was in there for a reason. It was to make it simple to a certain extent, but it also made it more complicated because, I think skills across the piece were slowly diminished because it was very easy. You just went to your incumbent supplier and they would do this for you and they would have that. We've got to identify the right skills that need to sit inside each of our government organizations and make sure that they are government, and then engage with the suppliers and partners in the way in which we did during the pandemic. And I think that's something I can sense is starting to happen. So I'm pretty optimistic, but the funding is always going to be a killer.
Go to Tom next.
I'll keep mine really brief. It was, I think the causes for optimism is, we did it collectively. We got this stuff done, and actually there's 1,000,001 reasons why that might not have happened. And as a country and as government departments, as groups of suppliers, we got this stuff done. I think that's a fantastic achievement that deserves lots of medals of honour, as Daniel described them earlier, for that, which is fantastic. The challenges for me, I put some of it in the chat. I think the increasing amounts of legacy across the piece that needs to be tackled is a big issue that's being stored up, and that we're going to have to start really getting our teeth into over the next few years.
Jacqui,
yeah, I think for me, the thing that makes me most optimistic is similar. Could not be more proud of the staff that have worked in every government digital department and operational department. At a time where we were all sent home, had to change our ways of working, flip around the things that we were working on all overnight without being able to come together, and what was achieved and the sense of pride. And I think for me, how close that brought digital to the citizen and seeing the real impact with the citizen and the level of motivation that drove, having that absolute clear vision, everybody aiming to achieve the single outcome, and the level of motivation and what's being churned through in terms of change. So I'm really optimistic about how that sets us on a really great foundation for moving forward in the next phase of our transformation. Biggest challenge, so for the DWP particularly, is in relation to the number of young people affected by the pandemic having lost their jobs. Our biggest challenge now is really getting services up and running to help support those people back to work, and we have to find better digital ways of doing that. So we are working with innovative video companies to help us deploy some video technologies to replace some of that face-to-face. So I think the challenge for us is really going to be getting those services, delivering against our strategy, and really staying aligned with whatever funding we get through the SR period, doing the best that we can to make sure that we're delivering those citizen services and really getting value out of the people and the partnerships that we have in play to drive some real transformation in this next SR, and hopefully prepare for a better SR for the next one.
I'm conscious on time, Daniel. Have you got something to finish? I feel like you might have a really good punchline for the group.
Oh gosh, I mean, if anything, we've over the last year and a half discovered the enormous value of science, right? People understand that science matters for our health, our life. But if you had to pick another thing that people have understood the importance of, I think it's been digital. And I think just that sort of big point about, the value of good digital or digitally enabled, I should say, services and how important it is for citizens, for operators, for policymakers, and so on. So I think that gives me I have enormous cause for optimism. Everything, if one had to sort of do a whiskey chaser of that, would simply say, I just hope that as we come out of the crisis and some of the inevitably, fast acting commercial decisions that had to be made don't lead to such a backlash and such a sort of, the forest grows back so aggressively because people are so afraid that, in fact, instead of inculcating the new methods, we're like, oh no, that was just an exception. Let's go back to incredibly complex and very sort of insurance-based rules of commercial, contracting. Because if we do that, then we'll lose. So enormously optimistic with a little whiskey chaser. We got to stay true.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. Your Dynamo medals will be in the post. It's like Blue Peter. You make, when you've been on one of our webinars, you get a badge that you can wear proudly on other webinars. So I might have to make that happen in the background, but I think that's, in the spirit of today's agile process, we can do that. So yeah, thank you all very much. Thank you to everyone who's been listening, and hope to see some of you all again at future Dynamo webinars. Many thanks.
So
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.